best trips I've made in my life, and I've done a lot of traveling. My brother and I recently went to Normandy, France. My father was in the 101st Airborne Division and was a medic paratroop, jumped out the back of an airplane at 300 feet in the rain at 1 o'clock in the morning on June 6, 1944, landed somewhere near the town of St. Mary-Glise and established an aid station there. And then from then went on to a number of cities and towns, places in Belgium and the Battle of the Bulge, etc. The etc. is a poor way of describing a year of pretty horrific conditions that he did not talk about for nearly 50 years. And he did not survive long enough to be able to get to the point where he could travel back to Europe, and he had a great deal of guilt for not visiting his friends who are still in the cemetery at Omaha Beach. So I have a long poem that I started writing a number of years ago, and I went back and revised it again after my trip with my brother in June. It's a long poem, and what you'll have to understand with me is I'm not necessarily literal or narrative. I sometimes let emotions get in the way, which is probably a good thing. So if I have a little trouble with this one, just bear with me. June 6, 1944, D-Day, Normandy. The 101st Airborne steps into the darkness. If I could be there in an instant, I would, I will, I might. Here is the doorway, beckoning. I step out across the wet earth of western France. Salt air signals Atlantic close beyond. 68 years pass, my father passed this way. He leans in to tell me again when earth and sky almost touched. I kneel, touch solid ground where we both walk. He, then me, now gathering courage to ask questions of this earth. If you were here far off from us, near the parking or information booth, you see no one here but me talking. My father is back in Texas, in his old self, wanting, dreaming, aching for a chance to be here, instantly, without the tribulations brought on by moving old bones across continents, an ocean, shuffling from hotel to taxicab, airport to customs, miles of roadway bearing him along, he bearing 68 years of living since then, 65 dead soldiers stacked impossible, invisible, across all hope of living here. All hope died and gone, but he lived on past his year in France, Holland, 1944, to give me permission to tell you one small story never filmed, never printed frame by frame across the raw footage air makes, flying along the hull of an American Airlines 747, flying somewhere near 39,000. I gather myself up at the foot of an airport hallway somewhere in Paris, find the train to come, the center point of a countryside of gravestones. It is somewhere about here I bend down, read white and white engraving across white marble crosses, evenly littering, evenly leveling this field. Men die here every day, seeing those dead gone here, going down into the elemental gray. Given names at birth, weighed, then raised, loved, sent singly, or en masse, to the massed graves, here sliding slowly out to sea. I know my father holds me then, in a locked-up part of his loins in 1944, waiting for death to deliver him as he picks, chooses, sighs down, plunders, mutilates, all but randomly chosen, all but dead anyway with grief, horror, fear, shame, 1944. Hope gives its humorous brevity a saunter across the tilted stage of a mind's eye, lifting only to dash on the cliffs above Omaha Beach, my father's eyes, his company of sainted strangers he calls men, he calls out to in the darkness of a 3 a.m. afternoon in France, as I give a ragged voice to my fears of finding one more of his company here, as my father also lays with strangers of all wars in the veteran cemetery in Arlington, Texas, dead now only these 4 years, but dead now, sharing with me a conversation in spite of, finally, about a parachute landing at 3 or 4 a.m. in the flooded fields of Normandy, France. I find room here to tell you as best I can of my current and constantly recurrent dream. Somewhere in these fields, my father's boot tracks are still slowly filling with mud, which is, when I think of it now, all of this is now, a constantly variable moment in time occurring over and over. Whenever I think it, whenever my father, wherever he is, brings it to mind. Those highly impermanent, hastily formed boot tracks laid out across the blackened soil that is forming itself constantly in the rain, canceling all connections as fast as they make themselves. A primordial oozing going on as it has gone on, erasing the remainders of last year's crops, the reminders of this year's invasions, the bodies buried 3 centuries ago, the bodies stepping out on air into another flow of time, rain-soaked darkness moving at 125 miles per hour past silvery-winged interruptions in this present darkness, hurrying themselves to the flooded French fields, hurrying as if time itself will not wait, running to catch up, grinding the gears of the machinery of war that moves along, humming a forgettable tune under its breath, preparing openings in the fabric of possible outcomes that are sewing themselves into 100,000 shrouds for 100,000 human beings, preparing the voices to sing the dirge, the howl, the primitive wailing that might be music in some far land, that might be studied in universities for its character, its dry, pithy methods of weaving what cannot be spoken amongst the cross-threadings of what cannot be stopped. A thick, flowing carpeting, showing myrrh, frankincense, gold, sprouting a jangle of cymbals, pipes, drums. A lone cannon coughing 1,000 other cannons into being through the miracle of modernity, made into the Frankenstein war machine. Our finest ones, our finest meals, our finest foodstuffs, our finest sons and daughters smartly dressed to kill, our finest hours and years lined up before the ovens, before the furnaces, before the teeth begin to grind, to clench, to masticate, to spit out the remainder of what I see in some dark corner of this world. An outcome which is constant, constantly happening, which is as unknowable, as unstoppable as time. These tracks began from the air, in the air, the wet black air above a field in Normandy near St. Mary-Glise. It is dark and parachutes are opening or not. Frail night blooms that, thin enough to let moon through if there were no rain and clouds, nevertheless hold the air for the short life of each flowering, then collapse into the flooded fields of France. Beneath each willowy chance, a man dances. My father ends in wet water, let in when the Germans flooded the lowlands to catch and hold him. He floats because he is a medic, buoyed by rolls and rolls of roll bandaging, wrapped against the air, giving life, life where none found many men that night as they hit the darkness, plunged to the bottom of the flooded fields, never came up. Years go by after this, or minutes, or years, no manner of telling. My father floats then, finding his way to the raised island of a hedgerow, numb, cold, not even yet knowing that he is alive. I stand here waiting to tell you and him of my doom, my discovery. All ground covers the earth but thinly. Bones continue to rise in the spring rains, a coming out, a going back into light where there is no more light. So I turn to begin the long walk home.